She trembled on her wedding night, but her millionaire husband's gentle touch broke her fear. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain drummed softly against the glass as the city of Chicago blurred into streaks of silver and gold. Inside a quiet bistro, the light from hanging lamps fell across two people who looked like they belonged to different worlds. Elena Rivera, 24, sat stiffly at the table, her hands clenched around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Across from her was Ethan Graves, the man whose name carried power in every corner office in the city. He was composed, unreadable, his tailored suit untouched by the storm outside. "Elena," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "You need money. I need a wife. Let us call this what it is, a transaction." The words hung in the air, sharp and impossible. Elena blinked, thinking she had misheard him. "I am sorry." "What?" Ethan's expression did not change. "Marriage. In name only. You will stay by my side for 1 year, attend the events my company requires, maintain the image of a devoted wife, and in return, your debts will be cleared. Your grandmother's house will be safe." She stared at him, her pulse echoing in her ears. The cafe was nearly empty, the hum of jazz fading beneath the sound of her own heartbeat. "You cannot be serious." "I am," he said simply. "I do not have time for courtship or scandals. You are educated, discreet, and more importantly, desperate enough to say yes." Her eyes burned. "You are buying a wife." "I am offering you freedom," he replied calmly. "You can think of it however you wish." Elena looked down at her trembling hands. Freedom. The word twisted inside her. The hospital bills on her kitchen table. The eviction notice taped to her grandmother's front door. The endless nights counting every dollar that was never enough. She had run out of choices long before this meeting. "What are the conditions?" she asked quietly. Ethan reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table. "There are 5. He flipped open the first page. "Number 1, this marriage remains private. No press, no leaks. Number 2, no physical involvement. Number 3, you will accompany me to all official events. Number 4, you will not interfere in my personal affairs. Number 5, this arrangement ends after 12 months. At that time, you will receive full compensation." He slid a pen across the table. "Do you agree?" Elena's throat tightened. "Why me?" He met her gaze for the first time, and for a brief second she saw something human, something tired behind the polished exterior. "Because you do not want my money. You want your dignity back. That is the kind of honesty I can trust." The rain outside grew louder, a curtain of sound between them and the rest of the world. Elena swallowed hard, her chest tight. 1 year, she whispered. 1 year, he repeated. Her hand trembled as she signed her name. The pen felt heavy, final. Ethan closed the folder and rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket. "The ceremony will be tomorrow evening. My assistant will arrange everything." When he left, the bell above the cafe door chimed softly. Elena sat frozen, staring at the untouched coffee, the echo of his voice still in her ears. She wanted to believe she had just saved her grandmother's home, but deep down, she knew she had sold a part of herself she could never reclaim. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline. The storm had not stopped, it had only changed direction. Later that night, Elena stood by her apartment window, watching the rain fall over the city she could no longer afford to call her own. Somewhere out there, Ethan Graves, the man she would marry tomorrow, was probably sipping aged whiskey in his penthouse, untouched by doubt or fear. And yet, as thunder rolled across the sky, she could not shake the thought that beneath his calm, there was something broken too. The contract was signed. The deal was sealed. But neither of them knew that what began as a transaction would soon become something neither money nor rules could control. The next evening, the city shimmered under a pale sky, washed clean after the storm. Elena stood in front of a mirror inside a quiet courthouse hallway, her hands clutching a small bouquet of white roses. Her reflection looked back at her, a girl wrapped in a borrowed dress, with eyes too tired for her age. Ethan Graves appeared behind her in the mirror, tall and composed in a charcoal suit. He looked like a man walking into a business meeting, not a wedding. His expression was unreadable as always. "Are you ready?" he asked simply. Elena turned, her voice small. "Do I have to be?" A shadow of something crossed his face, not quite a smile, not quite pity. "It will be over quickly." Inside the courtroom, there were no guests, no music, only the sterile echo of words that did not sound like vows. The clerk read through the ceremony in a monotone, the scent of old paper filling the air. When the time came, Ethan slid a simple gold band onto her finger. It was cold, weightless, almost meaningless. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the clerk said. Ethan extended his hand formally. "Congratulations, Mrs. Graves." Her fingers trembled as they touched his, and in that moment, something sharp twisted in her chest. She managed a faint nod, forcing the corners of her lips to lift. "Thank you." Outside, the sky had turned orange with sunset. A black car waited by the curb. Ethan opened the door for her, a small gesture of courtesy that felt strangely hollow. They rode in silence through the glittering city until the car turned down a private drive and stopped before a massive steel gate. Beyond it rose a mansion that looked carved from glass and stone. The air smelled of pine and rain. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, chandeliers, and walls lined with abstract paintings that must have cost more than her grandmother's entire house. "This will be your room," Ethan said as they entered the upper floor. The space was immaculate, untouched, with cream walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. A white bed stood neatly made in the center. "Dinner is at 7. You do not need to join if you prefer to rest." Elena hesitated in the doorway. "You really live alone here?" He glanced around the vast room, his tone neutral. "I find solitude efficient." Then he turned to leave. When the door closed, the silence was deafening. She walked to the window, watching the water ripple under the fading light. From this height, the world looked distant and perfect, a place she could never belong to. At dinner, she sat across from him at a long mahogany table that could seat 20, though there were only 2 of them. The food looked exquisite: steak, asparagus, red wine, but her stomach refused to cooperate. She could feel his eyes on her, steady and unreadable. "Is something wrong?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "No, it is just, I have never eaten food like this." Ethan set down his fork. "You will get used to it." His words were not cruel, but they carried no warmth either. For a moment, she wanted to ask him why he had chosen her, why he had chosen anyone at all. But she swallowed the question, afraid of what the answer might reveal. After dinner, she wandered through the halls, her footsteps soft against the marble. Every portrait, every object, seemed to belong to a life that had frozen in time. In the study, she noticed a framed photograph of a younger Ethan, standing beside a man who resembled him slightly, same jawline, same eyes, but there was a tension even in the still image. Her curiosity was interrupted by his voice behind her. "That was my brother." Elena startled and turned. He stood by the doorway, one hand in his pocket. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "I did not mean to intrude." "It is fine," he said quietly. "He died 6 years ago. The tabloids called it an accident. They were wrong." There was pain in his eyes, but it flickered out as fast as it came. He straightened his cufflink, his composure snapping back like armor. "It is late. You should rest." When he left, the room felt colder. Elena touched the edge of the photo frame, the glass smooth beneath her fingers. For the first time, she wondered if this marriage of convenience had brought her into something far darker than debt and charity. That night, she lay awake in the vast bed, the glow of the city bleeding through the curtains. In the distance, she heard the faint sound of the lake against the rocks, steady and unchanging. She closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother's voice, the promise she had made to protect their home, the contract she had signed in exchange for safety. But as she drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought refused to fade. This man, this quiet, disciplined millionaire, was not as unfeeling as he pretended. And somewhere beneath the rules they had written, something was beginning to change. Morning came quietly, slipping through the sheer curtains like pale silk. Elena stirred in her bed, unsure for a moment where she was. The scent of polished wood and expensive linen reminded her this was not home. This was Ethan Graves's world now, and she had signed herself into it. A soft knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, a woman in a gray uniform greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Graves. I am Clara, Mr. Graves's housekeeper. Breakfast is served in the solarium." Mr. Graves asked me to remind you that you have a fitting appointment afterward. A fitting? Elena repeated, blinking. Yes, Clara said kindly. Mr. Graves wants you to have proper clothes for the events you will attend together. Elena nodded, murmuring a quiet thank you before closing the door. She looked down at her worn jeans and cardigan, the only thing she had brought from her apartment. The contrast made her chest tighten. In the solarium, sunlight poured through glass walls, scattering across the table laid out with fruits, pastries, and a single folded newspaper. Ethan was already seated, reading. He looked up briefly when she entered. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied softly, unsure whether to sit before he gestured to the chair across from him. She picked at a croissant while he returned to his paper. The silence stretched thin until she gathered the courage to ask, "Do I need to attend many events?" He turned a page. "Enough to make this arrangement believable. The first one is a charity gala next Friday. You will be introduced as my wife." Hell, the words settled heavy in her chest. "Your wife?" she repeated quietly, almost to herself. Ethan's eyes lifted to meet hers. "It is just a title, Elena. You will get used to it." Something inside her twisted, but she said nothing. Later that morning, she stood in front of mirrors at a private boutique downtown, while stylists measured her, pinned fabric, and held up gowns shimmering under soft lights. Ethan waited nearby, phone in hand, distracted but observant. Every time she stepped out in a new dress, his gaze flickered up clinical at first, then quietly thoughtful. "That one," he said finally, nodding toward a deep emerald gown that hugged her frame without effort. Elena frowned slightly. "It feels too expensive." "Everything here is expensive," he replied simply, "but that one looks like you." The words caught her off guard. For the first time, she saw a faint warmth beneath his composure. She turned back to the mirror, unable to hide the color rising in her cheeks. That evening, Clara brought her a silver envelope sealed with Ethan's initials. Inside was a printed list: contract rules, personal conduct, the same ones he had mentioned, but now official, signed by him. Rule 1, maintain public decorum. Rule 2, no personal interference. Rule 3, no physical contact beyond appearances. Rule 4, confidentiality in all matters. Rule 5, termination upon mutual consent after 1 year. Elena read the paper twice. It felt colder now that it was written in ink. She slipped it into the drawer beside her bed, but the words echoed in her mind long after the lights went out. Days passed in a careful rhythm. Ethan left early each morning, his schedule packed with meetings and board sessions. She filled her hours exploring the mansion's quiet corners, sketching by the window, or talking to Clara, who treated her with quiet respect. One afternoon, Elena found herself in the garden behind the house. Roses bloomed in symmetrical rows, each color perfectly placed. She was trimming a wilted petal when she heard footsteps behind her. "I did not expect you to enjoy gardening," Ethan said. She turned, brushing soil from her hands. "It is calming. Plants do not judge you." His lips curved slightly. "That might be the first honest thing anyone has said to me this week." She smiled faintly, unsure how to reply. He stood beside her, sleeves rolled up. Tie loosened, a rare sight of him unguarded. For a brief moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man trying to remember what peace felt like. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Living like this, alone, surrounded by everything money can buy, but nothing that feels real." He paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Money does not build walls, Elena. People do. And I have built plenty." The honesty in his tone startled her. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He looked at the screen, his expression closing again. "Excuse me, I have to take this." When he walked away, the garden felt emptier. That night, Elena passed his study on her way upstairs. The door was half open. She hesitated, then peeked in. Ethan sat at his desk, the same photograph of his late brother on the shelf beside him. He was staring at it, unmoving. The hardness in his face had melted into something else, grief, maybe, or guilt. Elena stepped back quietly, not wanting him to know she had seen. Back in her room, she stood by the window, the lake glittering under the moonlight. The mansion, so vast and perfect, still felt foreign. But for the first time, she sensed that both she and Ethan were prisoners in their own ways, one bound by poverty, the other by pride. And though the contract said there would be no M, The week of the charity gala arrived faster than Elena expected. Every morning, the mansion buzzed with quiet preparation, stylist appointments, security checks, the steady rhythm of staff who moved like clockwork under Ethan's direction. The night of the event, she stood in front of the mirror once again, this time in the emerald gown he had chosen, the silk draped around her shoulders like water. Clara fastened the last clasp of her necklace and whispered, "You look beautiful, Mrs. Graves." Elena smiled faintly. "Thank you, but I'm not sure I belong in a place like that." Clara met her eyes through the mirror. "You belong wherever you choose to stand." Downstairs, Ethan was waiting near the grand staircase, dressed in a black tuxedo. When he saw her, he froze for just a second. His usual control faltered. "You clean up well," he said quietly. "So do you," she replied, and for the first time he smiled, small, real, fleeting. The drive to the gala was silent except for the hum of the city passing by. Elena's palms were damp against her clutch, and her reflection in the car window flickered between fear and disbelief. When they arrived, cameras flashed in every direction. The marble steps leading to the ballroom were lined with reporters. Ethan reached for her hand. It was purely for the cameras, she reminded herself, but the warmth of his fingers steadied her more than she expected. Inside, the room glittered with chandeliers and the laughter of people who had never known struggle. Waiters in crisp white shirts passed champagne flutes and canapes. Ethan guided her through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings, his hand occasionally brushing hers. "Elena, this is Mr. Porter, our chief investor," he said, introducing her. She smiled, spoke carefully, answered questions about their honeymoon and future plans, as if they were real. The lies rolled off her tongue too easily. During a brief lull, she slipped away to the balcony to catch her breath. The night air was cool against her skin, and she exhaled shakily. Behind her, Ethan appeared, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "You handled that well," he said, offering her one. "I did not faint," she said lightly. "That feels like an achievement." He chuckled softly. "You surprised them tonight?" "How so?" "They expected someone pretending to fit in, but you carried yourself like you belonged." His voice was calm, but there was a warmth in it that reached her before the meaning of his words did. For a moment, they stood side by side, the city lights shimmering below like scattered stars. Elena glanced at him. "You are different tonight," she said. "So are you," he answered. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was fragile, full of things neither dared to say. When they returned inside, a photographer asked for a picture. Ethan placed his arm gently around her waist. The flash went off, and she felt his breath near her ear as he murmured, "Just smile, Elena. They are all watching." She did, and for a heartbeat, she forgot it was an act. As the night ended and the car doors closed behind them, she looked out at the rain beginning again, soft against the windows. The gala had been a test, and somehow they had both passed it. But deep inside, Elena knew something had shifted. The line between the contract and her heart was starting to blur. The next few weeks unfolded like a rhythm she had never known. Every morning began with quiet breakfasts, polite conversations, and the low hum of Ethan's schedule filling the mansion. What had once felt like a gilded cage now felt strangely alive. Since the gala, something between them had changed, too subtle to name, yet impossible to ignore. He was less guarded, more human. Some evenings, he would find her reading by the fireplace and stop to ask about her day. She would answer cautiously, expecting the conversation to end, but it never did. One evening, a storm swept through the city again. The windows trembled with wind, and the lights flickered. Elena found herself walking toward the library, drawn by the faint sound of a piano. When she opened the door, Ethan was there, his jacket off, his fingers moving lightly over the keys. The melody was quiet, heavy with memory. "I did not know you played," she said softly. He looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "It helps me think." "It sounds sad," she said. "It was my brother's song," he replied. "He wrote it when we were young. I kept it after he was gone." Elena stepped closer. "You must miss him." He nodded once. "Every day." For a moment neither spoke. The storm outside softened, and the room filled only with the sound of rain and the fragile notes of the piano. She could feel the ache behind his calm, the loneliness hidden beneath years of discipline. Without thinking, she whispered, "You do not have to carry everything alone, Ethan." He stopped playing, his hand still on the keys. His eyes met hers dark, searching. "And what would you know about that?" "I know what it means to lose everything and still pretend you are fine," she said quietly. Something in his expression faltered. He looked away first, standing abruptly. "You should rest. It is late." But as he passed her, his hand brushed against hers. It was accidental, fleeting, but it sent a tremor through her chest. That night, Elena could not sleep. She sat by her window, the memory of his touch replaying again and again. She told herself it meant nothing. It was not supposed to mean anything. The contract made that clear, yet her heart refused to obey paper and ink. A few days later, the mansion prepared for another event, this time a board meeting held in Ethan's own home. Elena had never seen him so tense. He reviewed documents for hours, his jaw tight, his voice clipped. When she entered the study with a tray of tea, he barely looked up. "Leave it there," he said, distracted. She hesitated. "Is something wrong?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "An internal audit. Someone has been leaking information to the press. If this continues, the board will turn on me." She wanted to help, to offer comfort. But the wall between them rose again. "I am sure you will handle it," she said softly. He looked at her then, weary but grateful. "You always sound so certain." I have to be," she said. "One of us should." Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. Then he turned back to his papers. As she walked out of the room, Elena realized something she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with a man who still believed love was just another kind of risk. It was past midnight when Elena found Ethan on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them like a map of broken stars. The board meeting had ended hours ago, but he still stood there, sleeves rolled up, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The wind tousled his hair, softening the hard lines of his face. "You should rest," she said quietly from the doorway. He did not turn. "I cannot sleep." Elena stepped closer, the night air cool against her skin. "Because of the company?" "Because of everything," he admitted. "The board wants control. Investors want reassurance. I am surrounded by people who want something from me." She hesitated. "And what do you want?" For the first time, he looked at her, his eyes darker than the sky behind him. "Peace," he said. "Just a moment when nothing feels like a transaction." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She moved to stand beside him, the hem of her robe brushing his sleeve. They stood in silence, the distance between them shrinking with every heartbeat. "I used to believe success would protect me," he continued. "That if I worked hard enough, built something big enough, I would never feel small again. But all I built was isolation." Elena's voice was soft. "Then stop building walls." He smiled faintly, a sad, grateful smile. "You make it sound simple." "It is not," she said. "But maybe it is worth trying." A gust of wind swept across the balcony, and she shivered. Without a word, Ethan took off his suit jacket and placed it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed her collarbone, and for a second, the world seemed to stop. "You do not have to," she began. "I know," he interrupted. "But I want to." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding that neither contract nor circumstance could erase. When she turned to face the city again, he stayed beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of everything they could not say. Later that night, she lay awake, replaying the moment over and over. The sound of his voice, the weight of his jacket, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the unsteady rhythm there. In another part of the mansion, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the contract he had once written so precisely. The words that once brought him control now felt meaningless. His pen hovered above the page as if he wanted to cross out every rule he had created. When he finally closed the document, he whispered to the empty room, "She deserves better than this." Neither of them slept that night. And though nothing had been said aloud, both knew that the boundaries they had built were starting to crumble. By dawn, the rain had returned soft, steady, familiar. It was the same kind of rain that had started everything, but this time it no longer felt cold. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them dared to name. The calm did not last. By the end of the week, the world outside their quiet mansion began to close in. Early one morning, Ethan's phone buzzed nonstop. His expression darkened as he read the messages. "Someone leaked the contract," he said quietly. Elena froze. "What do you mean?" The agreement between us. Every detail. It is online photos, dates, signatures. The board thinks I staged this marriage for sympathy. They are demanding a review. Her pulse quickened. But I did not tell anyone. I swear I did not. I know, he said, his voice tight, but his eyes were distant. That is not the point. The damage is done. Within hours, news reporters gathered outside the gates. Headlines screamed about the fake marriage of Chicago's youngest millionaire. Every outlet twisted the story into something cruel. At breakfast, Clara turned on the television, only to switch it off quickly when Elena appeared on screen, her face blurred but recognizable. Ethan spent the day locked in his office, answering calls from lawyers and investors. When Elena finally went to see him, he was standing by the window, the phone buzzing unanswered in his hand. "Ethan," she said softly, "we can explain. We can tell them why." He cut her off. "You think anyone will believe that? You think they will see anything but a scandal?" She stepped back, her throat tight. "So what are you saying?" "I am saying you should leave," he said, his tone controlled but trembling. "At least until this dies down. The more you are here, the more they will destroy you." Tears stung her eyes. "That is not fair. I did nothing wrong." He looked at her then, guilt and pain warring behind his composure. "You are right, but sometimes being right does not protect you." The silence between them stretched until she finally turned away. "I will go pack." He did not stop her. Hours later, she walked down the grand staircase with a single suitcase. The rain had started again, heavy and relentless. Ethan stood by the door, his jaw clenched, his hands buried in his pockets. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered. He said nothing, only watched as the car pulled away through the rain. When the gates closed behind her, the mansion felt larger than ever and emptier too. Ethan stood alone, listening to the echo of her footsteps fading into the storm, realizing too late that the only person who had ever seen the real him was the one he had just let go. Days turned into weeks, and the story refused to die. The press hunted her down, twisting her silence into guilt. Elena found shelter in a small apartment near the lake, working part-time at a local art studio to pay her rent. Each night, she watched the news without sound, waiting for his name to fade from the headlines. It never did. Then one evening, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, rain-soaked, exhausted, and no longer the man who hid behind suits and silence. "They know the truth now," he said. "It was my assistant who leaked the contract to the press. She was paid by a rival investor. You were right all along." Elena's eyes widened. "Then why are you here?" "Because I owe you an apology," he said. His voice broke on the last word. "You lost everything because of me. I told you to leave when I should have fought for you." She hesitated, her heart pounding. "You did not have to come." "Yes, I did," he said, "because I need you to know that it was never just a contract to me." The room went still. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. "I tore it up," Ethan continued. "Every page, every signature. I do not want a year-long deal. I want a lifetime if you can still stand to look at me." Elena felt her breath catch. The rain outside softened, tapping gently against the window like it had the night they met. She took a step toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then stop standing in the rain," she said. "Come home." He exhaled shakily, and for the first time, there was no distance between them. The following morning, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. The storm had finally passed. Ethan and Elena stood together by the window of her small apartment, the city below still glistening with rain. He looked different now, no tailored suit, no mask of control, just a man who had chosen honesty over pride. "I do not expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I want to earn it." Elena studied him for a long moment. The man who once spoke only in contracts and numbers was now standing in front of her with nothing but sincerity. "You already started to," she said softly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the same gold ring he had once slipped on her finger in that cold courthouse. But this time the inscription inside was new, 3 small words: "No more rules." "This is not about obligation anymore," he said. "This is about choice. I want to start again with no signatures, no deals, no time limits, just us." Her eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from relief. "Do you really mean that?" He nodded. "This time I am not asking for a contract. I am asking for a promise." She took a deep breath, her heart steady now. "Then my answer is yes." A faint smile curved his lips as he slipped the ring onto her finger once more. It no longer felt cold. It felt alive. Weeks later, the media's interest faded, replaced by new scandals and newer stories. But for them, life had found a quieter rhythm. The mansion that once echoed with loneliness now carried the warmth of laughter, music, and the soft hum of a piano returning to life. Clara smiled every time she passed the study door, hearing their voices overlapping with gentle teasing. The world outside still had its noise, but inside, there was peace. One afternoon, as they stood together on the same balcony where he had once confessed his emptiness, Ethan took her hand. The sun was setting across the lake, gold spilling over the water. "Do you ever think about how it began?" he asked. She smiled. "A contract, a storm, and a lie that turned into something real." He laughed quietly. "You make it sound almost poetic." "It was," she said, "just not the kind of poetry written on paper." He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss against her forehead. "This time, there are no terms, no clauses, no end date." "Good," she whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere." As the last light of day faded, they stood there together, no longer bound by signatures, but by something far stronger. Love, once written in ink, had been rewritten in truth. And for Ethan and Elena Graves, the story that began as a deal ended as a promise that would last a lifetime.